So, hello everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. I'm Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning and She Finance, and today I'm delighted to welcome Vivine Cameron to the show. Vivine is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Chartered Insurance Institute, where she works to promote greater diversity and inclusion across the organisation and the wider insurance and personal finance profession. Her career spans a range of sectors, giving her a broad and practical perspective on inclusion and professional development. At heart, Vivine is a passionate learning and development professional focused on helping people achieve their personal and professional goals, and her work has been widely recognised, including being named as Insurance Business UK Elite Woman in 2024. So Vivine, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Gretchen, thank you so much, and thank you very much for the invitation.
And how does it feel having, your bio read out? That's what I always like to, it's always, hang on.
I recently said to a colleague, I'm getting you comfortable with celebrating my personal achievements. I, of course, like recognition. Who doesn't? It sounds very foreign to me because I just see that I'm working hard and doing my job. But it's nice to get that recognition. So yeah, that's how I'm feeling about it.
Excellent. So do you just want to, off the back of that, tell everyone listening a little bit more about yourself and your career journey so far?
Yeah, so it's really important that I give context and also recognition to my parents. So very camouflaging, but I'm the child of a Windrush generation couple. So both my parents, Kelvin and Juna, came to the UK in the 1960s, and they came as British subjects. They came on a British passport with Jamaica written on it, and they came with a lot of ambition and a real sense of a strong work ethic and the opportunity to make a better life for themselves. They met, and subsequently I came along. I'm the third of their marriage. I've come from a blended family. My parents had children before they met, and my parents instilled the importance of education, hard work, and a very sensible approach to managing money. To make sure, one of the things my dad always used to say to me is don't go out without any money in your pocket. So it was instilled in me from early doors that working hard was very important, that education was a means to get the job that will enable you to live. So my career has been a squiggle, it's not a line. So I went to university late because there's an 18 months rather, huge difference between my older sister and I, and my parents couldn't afford for us to go to university at the same time. So I elected post A-level stage to go to secretarial college, get some skills, get some work experience with a view to go to university later. What actually happened was my mother passed away quite young. So she was 53, so I was just approaching my 21st birthday. So my financial support of progressing my education was lost to a degree. So in the end, after about a year or two after my mother passing, and my parents really had a plan, they put things in place. So my father wasn't landed with a mortgage because I had an endowment mortgage, so the mortgage was paid and my father was sitting quite comfortably, but still had a 14-year-old child to maintain. I elected to go to university and funded myself. And what my mother left to me by agreement of my father to her will, I was a beneficiary. So some of what she left me, I used towards my education. But otherwise, during my degree, I was working in the holidays, going back as a legal secretary. And in those days, going back a way, Gretchen, there were government grants. So I had a government grant and I was subsidising the government grant with my own earnings. And I did that for the 2 years out of my degree. In the final year, I took on a student loan, which I knew I could pay back because I had a career already. Started in continued as a legal secretary, went to a great partnership that I'd contracted with every summer and every holiday. They saw some talent in me and said, well, would you like to be a trademark attorney, like a lawyer? And I thought, this is a great opportunity. And, they don't often offer this to women. And I've come up through, a port business function. And there's something about it that wasn't appealing to me. I thought, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? I've watched the lawyers I work with, they're losing sleep over, deals or contracts where they're insuring. And I thought, no, that's not really for me. So they were really great and said, well, look, stay with us until you find what it is you want to do. So that's when I moved into higher education. I went and worked at Goldsmiths University of London in effect what is the Vice Chancellor's office in the quality assurance team, and I was the administrator there. So I was still entry level, still working my way up, still plugging away, and that's where I learned I was really good at training. I was handed this project of training the lecturers and the students in their student programs, of assuring the university that all was well, that the programs were working, the student experience was great, and that there was value in what they were learning in their student experience. And so that's when I thought, I think I want to do training for a living. So I continued to work in education for another 2 years until an opportunity came up at American Express in a training team. So again, went in at entry level admin. That role or contract ended, got subsumed into the wider organization, and then got another opportunity, entry level again, to be a training coordinator for the global merchant services team. So that was phenomenal, because in my first week, my then boss said, right, what's your aspiration? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? So I said, well, I see myself as a professional qualified trainer, and they made that happen.
Wow.
It was
Okay.
phenomenal. I really can't say enough about, there's a reason why they're one of the top 100 employers around the world. Everybody had a career path or career plan that they worked to. And I was supported in my development. I was supported in my studies. I was given the opportunity once I qualified to start training colleagues. So I was training, onboarding the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and also those in, to an extent, into Japan, Asia, and Basin. And it meant I had opportunities to travel. So I went to Madrid, I went to Paris, I went to New York. It was phenomenal. Then the economic downturn happened, and I didn't quite get to Sydney. That was the next city to visit. But that was a great experience. And I stayed with American Express until about 2012, where the role I was doing was made redundant. And I wanted to see, did I have transferable skills? Had I learned enough? So I took the opportunity to contract out, work for myself. So I went to Marks and Spencer's, got some experience in retail. Went to Google, got some experience in a tech company, very different model of business. Went to a tech startup after that contract, and then eventually got to, let me see, how did it go? I went to the NHS because I had major surgery, so I had a bit of a career break there, but ended up going to contract at the National Health Service because I really wanted to give back to them. I felt they'd given me my health and ergo my life back. So I did pro bono work for them on the onboarding side whilst earning an income, because I had all these transferable skills that meant I could work after a spell of not working. And finally, I say finally, I then finished that contract at the NHS, went and worked in construction, all apart from what I'd done
Wow.
before.
I mean, all of these are so different.
Absolutely, but it's that thing of when you find a career or skill is transferable, you broaden your opportunities and options. And what I learned was you just have to understand the business you're in. Your skills don't change, but your adapting of those skills change, and you can negotiate and get a salary for it. And then that contract ended, or that permanent role ended at the construction company, and I again was looking for work, and the CII approached me and said, we got an opportunity, would you be interested? And this was mainly around L&D accreditation of what the insurance houses and personal finance houses were rolling out for their people. And I was just really excited because it was another field of work, just transferable skills. But I really loved the professions. I got a sense of people doing things and working towards the greater good of people. The CI, great people to work with, really nice culture. And I thought, I want to work here. And 8 years later and three roles on,
Here you
I'm
are.
here. Here I am.
Here you
And
are.
so that's the story.
Wow. I feel like some of all of those things are going to come up through our conversation with what you've learned along the way.
Yeah.
Especially, one of my first questions is always around what you learned around money when you were little.
Mm,
What's your earliest memory of money and how it shaped your views? And I mean, you've
mm,
already talked about your parents and
mm,
that ethic that they
mm,
brought
mm.
with their experiences. So can you open up on that a little bit more for me?
Yeah. So when my parents arrived in the 1960s, it was quite a challenging time. It was quite a hostile environment. I mean, on an occasion, some of the stories that my father recounted and some of his friends could be quite life-threatening. So you banded together with your community, people that looked like you and came from a similar background. And one of the challenges was they came to the country and they had no credit line or reference line. They literally landed. In my parents' case, was staying with extended family or relatives, so they had no one to vouch for them. So in terms of basic things we take for granted, like opening a bank account in order to get your salary paid in, they didn't have access to because there was no reference, there's no point of reference for the bank. So what my father told me, my mother told me, what used to happen in the community is that they'd have a community savings skill called partners. And basically what that means is that a group of people band together and each week or each month you put in a certain amount of money, and in those days it was 20, say £20, and £20 in old money is a lot of money in today's standards. And if you have 12 people, you have one person that's the banker, all 12 of you put in each week or each month, and then each member at an allocated point of the 12 months or weeks whatever, can draw down that money as a lump sum, or you can let it pass and go around again. So that was their mechanism of saving, to enable them to buy big ticket items, and in some instances formulate their savings to get a loan, or formulate their savings to put a deposit on a house. And I do recall my parents telling me that in some instances it was a case of people banding together and taking their lump sum or savings so that they could co-buy property together. So I say that to say my parents taught me the importance of saving and planning what it is you're going to do and how you're going to do it and what you're going to utilize that money for, and make sure that what you're buying because there's an end point that's actually going to take you where you need to go. In this case, it was housing. Housing wasn't great for a lot of people, and in many instances, there are many landlords that just wouldn't rent to Black people. So for them, this is a matter of survival and a basic need of having a home. And I can remember my parents working very hard and really being quite adamant. And in those days, you talk about social housing. In those days, the council, if they housed you, you had to live by their rules. You couldn't paint or decorate or do things in a certain way. You were at the mercy of what the housing um, manager for the council said or did. So my parents were quite adamant, no, we're going to have our own home. We're not going to be told what to do in our own home and what it looks like. So I'm one of the fortunate of first generation um, immigrants, because for all intents and purposes that's what they were, even though it wasn't presented to them in that way. Always lived in a home, always lived in a house. I've
Mm.
never lived in social housing. And not that there's anything wrong with that, it's perfectly fine. You live where you live. But my parents were very clear that you want to earn enough money that you can dictate and choose and make choices for yourself. And part
Yeah.
of that is working hard and managing that money well.
It's a pretty big aspirational decision that they made at that
Mm.
point to, save hard to be able to do that. And that feels
Mm.
like that's a message that's pretty strong, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And they weren't alone. Many of that generation, I'd say maybe one or two following them, that's their story. That's generations progress, it gets easier. And I'm very conscious of the shoulders that I stand on. And I'm very conscious of the opportunities and the provisions they've made, that I have the quality of life and am able to do the things that I can do.
Mm. And I mean, it's really interesting, when we think about money worries, everyone has them in different contexts. So,
Mm.
your parents would have thought about different money worries, and their experience obviously was very different from the experience now that you're able to
Mm.
have, because of the opportunities that they've, you know, as you say, given you, and how they work through that. I'm interested to know whether you've had money worries in the past that have maybe most shaped your choices when you've thought about financial decisions.
Yeah, I mean, going to university in effect as a mature student was, a real challenge financially. And my father he actually did me a service because he supported me in principle, but I didn't get a let, I had to work. And I can distinctly remember coming home at the holidays and not having a rest. Basically, I was getting up and going and doing a full-time job, having studied for the 3-month term or what have you. And it's um, my father's responsibility was to my younger sister. I wasn't a minor, I was an adult at that point. So managing my finances was important. I had to pay my own rent, I had to pay my share of bills, I had to feed myself, I had to clothe myself, and I was better off than a lot of students because I earned significantly more because I was working in the City of London every time I went back home. So I had to make sure that my money stretched and I could squeeze a holiday in, so I wasn't doing too badly. So that's one of the things that I do distinctly remember. I look back at it and think, how did you do that? But when you're looking, the only way is up, and I've got to get to where I want to get to, you just get on and do it. And the really telling thing that when I graduated, my mother had passed away by then, my father said to me, and I never forget, it's great, and in his own way of saying, I'm proud of you, he said, nobody, particularly men, can't tell you what to do. You can earn your own money, because I had an education which gave me a platform, an opportunity to get a career so I could be financially independent. And that's something that both my parents had instilled in me. And when I've reflected on my parents, because of the nature of their upbringing, they were the predominant breadwinners in their life were women, and the women around them worked. So for me, it's a bit of an interesting one when women talk about, I want to work and I want to have a career, because in my experience, that's just a normal thing.
That's what happened.
That's just what you do. You had your child, you could be pregnant and you're still going to work. You have your child, and then the generations before, the matriarchs will take on looking after the children while you go out to work. But I'm just very conscious of my own father's being brought up by his grandmother, who'd worked very hard, and then her his mother's sisters, they're all working around the island and sending back and being resourceful. So in my father's perspective, women always work, women maintain themselves. Don't be beholden to anybody, whether you're male or female. Have your own money. And I can also remember as a child, my parents, as couples do, talk about money, gets fractious, and the outcome of it I've learned is this: have your own account. Individuals if you're in a couple in a partnership, have your own accounts and have your shared accounts. And my parents had their own money to do what they wanted from their earnings, and then they came together and had their partnership and did what they wanted to do as a unit. So I had some very clear, staunch lessons and
Yeah.
experience and understanding of the value of financial independence, and that informed how I managed my life when I was on my own, so to speak.
And it's quite interesting thinking
Mm.
about that where they came, their heritage is that the women were kind of the people working and supporting. And I think we know that typically here
Mm.
that has been very different.
Yeah.
In your career, have you
Mm.
experienced the dreaded gender pay gap, and which also obviously affects our pension gap as well? Have you got something you could share, whether you have had experience of that personally?
I've not had experience of it personally, and I think it's more to do with my generation and age.
Okay.
Colleagues and people that have become colleagues that have become friends, I've seen it played out. So I know someone's a Wopsy woman, so to speak, who took a career break, brought her family, and came back to work and did phenomenal in the different career choices made on returning to work. But what I would say is, going back to my parents, I remember my father telling me in the UK, it must have been the 70s, because I was quite young, early 70s, and my father telling me that when my parents went to buy a property, the bank then said that they would not count my mother's income as well as my father's income. And my father was adamant that, well, hang on a minute, I work and she works. We can well afford this house and this mortgage. What do you mean by that? And the bank insisted, no, we only take the main breadwinner, and in those days, predominantly men's income, as the main income, and that alone. And the other interesting piece around it, my father insisted they put my mother's name on the title, because he said, I'm not doing this without her. So that's my experience of, or my knowledge of, disparities in salaries and pensions. And also, I'm aware that my mother was a qualified nurse, and she elected to work part-time so she could be at home with us as children. So she worked the nights, and my parents had this ship in the nights kind of thing. When my dad would pass her, she and hand us over as they swapped, did their various shifts. So at one point, my father was a motor mechanic, and he was unemployed for a long period. So we lived off the nurse's salary. The disparity of her salary, considering she's a skilled worker as my father, I think is quite telling. So that would be my understanding or experience of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely. It doesn't mean that we have to have experienced it directly to know,
No. No.
that those disparities are there. And I mean, I certainly see it day to day in my job, just talking to different people and different clients and their experience. So it's, you know, it's still a big issue. And my kind of bugbear is just how that's playing out on our overall pension gap
Yeah.
for women, and that is going to continue to be a big issue even through the generations, because now also we're making a lot of different choices, like maybe being self-employed, and
Yeah.
are we educated enough to realize that we also need to be contributing? So
Hmm.
those things are just so important
Yeah.
to make sure that we know about. So, just skipping forward a bit, thinking about how you manage your money now, but how do you balance enjoying life and enjoying things today with planning for, as we know we need to, planning
Mm.
for the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I find I'm a single person. I've been a single person for the majority of my adult life. I'm married, but by that I mean I'm married or not coupled, and I don't have children. Quite unusual for a woman of my, if you like, kind of, but it happens.
Mm.
And so what I found was is that one income is very difficult to buy property, which I managed to do, thankfully, thanks to my parents. And so just before lockdown in 2016, I actually decided to go into a partnership with my sister and buy a property together, because we was two separate entities. We thought, actually, let's just use our, resources. So that made it easier. And so whether it's a sister, a partner, or a friend, I think when you're a person by choice that's single or not, then look at other ways to partner to help your finances, because two is better than one. You get a better return. So in that mix, it's meant that I've had the opportunity to travel more than I did when I was running a house on my own. We are in challenging times. We are in a, cost of living is quite tight. So even with another, another earner, it can be challenging. So what I try to do is break my year up. I make sure that I gift myself regular breaks. And it's not always big holidays. The most important thing is actually just to stop, take stock, and have a break. So it may be a long weekend every quarter. I tend to go down to the coast. I may not be able to go overseas, but a coast trip for the weekend. I love the sea, forgive the pun, but the sea's very grounding for me. It just levels me out. So that's kind of what I'm finding is challenging. And I don't believe people should be pressured into relationships and that's your only means of financial stability and security. If you're fortunate enough to be a professional, so I know of lawyers, I know of doctors that are women that may be more challenging, more so than when I first started working, but they could buy properties by themselves and travel and have all those opportunities. Reimagining, shifting paradigms of how you might live your life is what I'd suggest is
Mm.
being considering to consider. And my father used to say to me, and well, both my parents, like, relationships are hard work, and it's better to be content in yourself as a single person than be in a relationship or a partnership that you're miserable and it's not working. Better your sanity than the financial returns.
Listen, this is something really, really interesting that I don't think has come up on the podcast. So this is season 4.
Right.
But one thing that has come up a couple of times is something you mentioned earlier around. So you mentioned about your family, your parents pooling, sort of saving as a collective, and
Mm,
then that collective, when they needed the money, being able to take the money. So I understand that was because of the banking,
mm,
sort of issues that they had getting that. But another couple of people have brought things up for me, obviously around, we've had the conversation before around church and the fact that,
mm,
that used to be a big thing where money
mm,
was sort of given in and then the church would lend money or give money to the people that needed it at that point.
mm,
A collective
mm,
again. And then I've also had a conversation about with a lady about people who struggle either with physical or mental disability impairment, able to collectively maybe join together again to buy
mm,
property or
mm,
to insure themselves in a way where they're able to save, but someone could maybe help if they were in need.
mm,
So I think this concept of we have got a very traditional concept in the UK. Everything's quite rigid
Mm.
you're, as you say, you're in a couple, you do those things, or you're single and you do things on your own. There's not collective purchases or living
Mm.
with groups. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's sort of not discussed that often
Yeah.
when we talk
Yeah.
about money.
Yeah. So culturally, my parents are Jamaican, so my heritage is Jamaican, and so the whole partner thing is common not only in Jamaica but in the Caribbean.
Right, okay.
And its roots, Caribbean people tend to have their diaspora from Africa, and that's something that started in Africa. And also, the Caribbean predominantly is Christian, and part of the faith is that you give to the church, and the church then is there to support the community. I teach them the next generation. I've taught my nephews that broadly, when you get money or when you earn, you give some, you save some, and you spend some, which is a neat way and gentle way of saying, the world's not all about you and there are people in need, but at the same time, doesn't mean you don't look after yourself. And that's a bit of for me, being a faith-based person, it's a very summarized and simple way of explaining what I do with my life and how I manage my
Yeah.
money. But to your question, I'm aware of the church thing. I'm aware of many churches supporting people, food banks, so it's a
Yeah.
modern example.
And more traditional,
Yeah,
it would have been more traditional
yeah, yeah,
tithing at that
yeah,
point with
absolutely.
family and
Absolutely.
in that older generation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've known gifts to be given, significant gifts, when families have been known to be in need. Let's just take this in another direction, another paradigm. Absolutely. If you are part of a disability community, I know of a situation of a young woman I knew who was training to be a physio and contracted COVID so severely whilst working in a hospital that she was rendered disabled. And just a GoFundMe was put together to enable her to get an electric chair so she could get up and around and get to university. And I'm so happy she's back to training to be a physio. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a particular context. It can happen as a community in different communities. The key learning is where the sum of our parts. If all the parts come together, then a sum can help in a myriad of ways. And let's not be short-sighted. Let's be considerate and caring about what that could mean, what that could look like.
Yeah, and I think
Mm.
the single thing,
Mm.
actually the stats are there will be more single women
Mm.
than ever before because of
Yeah,
decisions that we're making and
yeah.
because of the challenges that does cause with relationships,
Mm.
finding the right people and a lot of challenges that we've got with society at the moment. So I think
Mm.
that there will be more women who are in this position of like, how am I going to do this on a single salary? And it is challenging. I mean, I've done that single
Mm.
salary, got,
Mm.
done the house. And,
Mm.
but at the same time, I think the reality is that you then have to do everything. So you
Yeah,
are very, very, very aware of your finances and you are
yeah,
very, very, very aware of the decisions that you're making
yeah.
and have a freedom to a degree of being able to
Absolutely.
say, this is my decision and no one else's decision,
Yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
there are pros and cons to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to savings, etc.,
Mm.
my next question is, what saving or money habit has made the biggest difference to you? Is it this, I've got this thing of where you give, save, spend, those pots that you've talked about, before, or is there anything else that you think has made a big difference when you're planning your savings, etc.?
So I'm really pleased that you raised that because, yes, there are three buckets. And I had a really interesting thing happen. At the beginning of the year, I was doing a purge of papers and shredding and burning old materials. And I came across my late mother's diaries. It's one of those things that I'd put off and put off and put off. And I found an old letter where my mother principally was the driver of managing the finances, doing the admin of it. It was an old letter, and I'd forgotten about this because I kept saying, "Oh, my parents taught me how to save, but they didn't teach me about investments or how to put money in bonds or how to grow your wealth beyond putting it in a savings account." And then I picked up this letter and I thought, "Oh my goodness, they were ahead of the curve. They did invest because it was a letter about their bonds that they'd invested in." And we're talking about the mid 80s, it's £1,000. That was quite a lot of money in the 80s. And then my brain was triggered, like, oh yeah, I remember they cashed those in. But my point is that I had got so focused on my three buckets, and it's only probably in recent times. And thank you for your book, She Finance Work, but not a plug, but just an observation. There are other things I need to think about how I'm managing my money and my finances. So, looking at things like investments and looking at platforms, for example, Vanguard, there are others out there. I'm more minded, and also getting a financial advisor. And I'm really, really, one of the things I love about the personal finance profession is how collegiate it is, and you can talk to any personal finance or chartered financial planner in the course of my work. I speak with many of them, and we shoot the breeze about what investments look like, what people are doing with their money, and it ping, that's an idea. Oh, what's that? What does that mean? How does that work? So in answer to your question, yes, I have the three buckets, but when it comes to savings, I'm being more creative and I'm very, very risk averse. So I like to hold on to things and store things up, but being a little bit more adventurous as to, well, okay, if I've secured that harvest there like a little squirrel, what can I reasonably be comfortable to release that I'm not worried about if it goes wrong, that I'm not going to miss, but no, I'm still got that, security of what I've saved, not lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's really relevant, isn't it?
Mm,
When we're risk quite often doesn't come up in our conversations, but it is
mm,
just so important around us
mm,
understanding it feels risky, but is it
mm,
also risky for us to just keep doing the same thing?
mm,
And should we be absolutely, you've got your little squirrel's nest of
mm,
everything that you need protecting and your emergency fund and
mm.
your next amount of money that you're going to need for a holiday or what, or
Yep.
kitchen, a fridge,
Mm,
whatever it is, and
yep.
so that you can buy new tires.
Mm,
And then after that, actually, if as long as my base thing is secure, I have to understand if I don't take some risk with the other things,
yeah.
that could be risky for me. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really interesting that that's come up for you.
Yeah. I mean, when I first moved to my first home, I can distinctly remember buying a fridge freezer, frost-free fridge freezer, and I'd been sworn off hire purchase and debt by family friends, my parents' friends. Don't do hire purchase unless you really can afford it, and do one thing at a time. So this fridge freezer was quite telling. I learned an interesting trick. So I actually rang the company that I'd done the arrangement with to purchase a fridge freezer and said, by the way, can I make overpayments? And they said, yeah, you can. So no one gives you that information. It's the questions you
No, they
ask.
no.
So in effect, I paid it off quicker because I wasn't just paying the standard direct debit, I was paying the direct debit plus what I can afford, that little bit extra. So I paid it off quicker. And that was one of my proudest moments. And I think in terms of my own kind of having to manage in a very tight budget and living on my own, um, and I progressing further into life and talking to financial advisors, and an accountant, because when I was working for myself and I had to do my tax returns, and I was saying, oh, I've spent this amount of money on this, and he said, oh, but that's related to your house, that's good debt. And I never conceptually understood there is good debt versus bad debt. And it's that thing of, well, at the end of the day, and it was related to my house, at the end of, I think that's it, I took out a loan to repair a roof. Well, you can't, a roof without a house is not a house. It's something that you have, it's a must have. So taking out a loan to repair it isn't a false economy, it's a good debt. So, and it got paid off eventually anyways. It's shifting mindsets and understanding language and context and connotations, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you do have to be, and that's the other two key words, discipline and balance, and those are the
Yeah,
factors that I've learned.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a couple more questions and then we're going to run out
Sure.
of time. What does financial freedom mean to you, and how would you say you're working towards that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm gonna, I keep referring back to my parents, but my mother was quite visionary. She was
Mhm.
ahead of her time, as women go. And I can remember her saying, your father worked so hard, and he's not got a pension in place. We need to make sure it's put in place. And my dad was never really that fussed, but she made sure things were put in place. And as I said earlier, they took out an endowment mortgage because they were late 40s, early 50s when they bought their last property. And my mother was thinking ahead, and what happens something to me, what happens something to the father, what's going to happen with my kids. I say that to say my father didn't end up with the weight of a mortgage because the life assurances and the endowment meant that he didn't have that pressure. And not long after my mother passing my father's role at a Ford subsidiary, he was made redundant. And he was at an age where people don't recruit people, but he had his skills to fall back on so he could be self-employed. So I say all this to say that you, in your planning, financial planning, have a plan. Where do you want to get to? What's your ambition? What's your dream? My father worked to the point that he'd always had the aspirations to return back to his home country, build his own home, and that was his dream, and he successfully did it. And he was happily retired for 20 plus years before he passed away. So, and that's what I aspire to, because in the end, he worked because he chose to, not because he had to. And he was in a position whereby he could fulfill the things that he wanted to do. So I've learnt from that. Very different times, very different climate, but the principle's still there. Where is it you want to get to? How do you propose to get there, and work backwards from that? And in these times that we live in, that it's very challenging, it's quite volatile in markets, it's very uncertain, there's a lot of uncertainty. I've learned you've got to be prepared to pivot and be flexible, keep your end goal in sight. And to me, working towards that end goal, that is financial freedom. And just explore, ask questions. You know, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always questioning, or how does that work, or what's my options? Talk to as many people as you can. Ask questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You don't know what you don't know. And along the way, you learn something. And I meet people like yourself, Gretchen. I meet lots of different financial advisors through the course of my work. And just learning some of the things that they're saying, learning the experience of different diverse clients that they have and their needs, it helps me learn things that I can apply to my own life. So that's kind of what financial freedom looks to me, aspiration of where you want to get to.
What's one piece of money wisdom you'd like every woman listening to take away from today's conversation?
Goodness, I'm going to span generations here. So as early as possible, find out what it is you love to do. So I found out early that I love to do learning and development, and whether I made great money, which I did, or not so great money, I knew I could earn, and I knew I could go and work for myself. And I always say, particularly to younger talent, find out what you love to do. You probably know what you don't want to do, but find what you love to do and try and work out how you can earn money doing it. And then if you do what you love, then the only difficult thing about your day is dealing with people, and you can't control people and who they are and how they are. And then, you know, beyond that, be flexible and pivot. So I've worked, as we discussed earlier at the top of our conversation, I've done lots of different professions and industries, but the base point is I've always had the key skill set that's transferable, and it's made for an interesting life, and I've learned many things along the way that I've taken with me in different roles. So, you know, just have that in mind, and you know, have a plan, work your plan. You know, my dad worked his plan, my mother worked her plan. Lots of the people in their generation had a plan of where they wanted to get to. Their aspiration was to return to their country of their birth and build their own home and live out their days. And I'm also mindful that a lot of that generation didn't make it because due to ill health, just due to the sheer stress of living in an unfriendly environment. Got better, you know, and things changed, but fundamentally it's what is your plan, work your plan, be flexible with it, but keep your eyes focused on the goal.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. Before we end, can you let our listeners know how they can find out about the work that you're doing, or what's the best platform? Is it LinkedIn, or
Sure.
that kind of thing?
So the best platform really is LinkedIn. I use that principally for my professional work and or all the other things that I'm involved in. So I'm a trustee for the Ascension Trust that does a lot of work in the community. Again, harking back to my parents, I recognise they were, sometimes I think they were the community nurse and the community mechanic. Everyone went to them for advice, you know, that they offered, and people either took it or left it. But the point is that being part of the community, whether it's your professional community, your social community, is really important. I get great value and a lot of kudos and joy out of it. So if you want to learn more about what I do in my day-to-day professional life, you can go to LinkedIn, and my name spelling is there on the screen, and punch that into LinkedIn under search, and you should find me, and you can learn more about me, and you can see my checkered history of a career.
Excellent. Well, Vivine, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation so much.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Gretchen.